I'm going to show you my favourite method of tracing your pattern onto your fabric for your embroidery project. So I've used the Tracer app, and now I'm just trying to get my pattern to the right size for the hoop I'm using. And I tend to design it and try and make it the exact right size, but you really want to make sure that you're double checking that when you're getting it on your fabric too. So I've already locked the screen so that isn't going anywhere. And what you want to do is take the two bits of the hoop apart. You're going to want to take the smaller part of the hoop, so the inside of it. And your pattern, really, you don't want your pattern to go anywhere towards the inside of that hoop, really. You don't want it to go past the inside of the hoop there. Because if you think about when your fabric's going to be through the hoop in a little bit, it's going to be covering over that, and you can't put your needle through this hoop at all. The outside of your hoop, there's going to be a lot of space there where you're not going to be able to put your needle through once the fabric's over, so you really need to think about this, the smallest part, the smallest circle, that's your space. If we have a look at this now, I think, it all fits well. It's not too close to the edge. I think I could make it a little bit bigger because I've got writing, and when you have text in embroidery, you want to make sure it's going to be easier to embroider, and sometimes words can be a little bit more difficult to embroider, to be honest, because they're a little bit more fiddly. So the bigger the better, I would say. So I've taken the lock off, and I'm just gonna zoom in a bit more. Okay, so I've closed the curtains in the room I'm in. There's no lights on. Obviously, I've got this camera light on, which I'll turn off in a second, you'll see. So really, in order to get the most out of the tracing process, you want to turn all the lights off in the room, so that this is really shining through the fabric. So you can already see it a little bit. So I'm going to just lie the fabric on it, try and make sure it's central on the fabric. I like to use the hoop as a guide on top of the pattern as well, on top of the fabric. It really helps if you hold it down to keep the fabric nice and flat whilst you trace it through. So if I now, just before I do that actually, I'm going to be using this friction pen to draw on the fabric to trace the pattern through onto it. And these pens are great. I do explain them in another video a little bit. They are heat erasable pens. They're the ones that say that they're removed by friction. They are, so they've got like a little rubber on the end, but don't do that on your fabric, you might damage the fabric. These are also heat erasable, so I use a hairdryer. If I made a mistake when I was putting my pattern on the fabric, I could just use a hairdryer to remove it. And then at the end, once you've completely finished sewing and your embroidery is done, you can use the hairdryer to remove any pen marks that you can still see underneath your stitching. So now I'm going to turn my lamp off, and you can see immediately how much easier it is to see that pattern through the fabric now. So all that you need to do is, obviously, I say all that you need to do. It is you have to have a lot of concentration to do it. But you want to make sure, again, your fabric's even, the pattern's in the middle. Make sure your fabric's nice and flat. So like I'm pulling it apart a little bit there, because you want your pattern to be nice and accurate. You don't want to accidentally have like a little gap anywhere. And then just use the pen to start putting your pattern on the fabric. Okay, this is once I've finished drawing on the fabric, and see how it went. So pretty good. Not perfect, but that's okay. Especially a pattern like this, it doesn't need to be perfect. You can always go over bits of it now as well. Like I'm about to go over, I think, and just neaten up some of the writing, and also just make sure that some of these, like there's a little gap there, I'm just going to make sure that this matches. So I'm just going to give it that little bit extra time, look at the pattern and just make sure I'm happy with it, because that is ultimately how it's going to turn out once I stitch over it. So I've got my pattern on, just printed out onto paper, black and white. I've got my hoop with my fabric in it, but instead of drawing the pattern on the top of the hoop like I would stitch it, I'm going to use the other side so that the fabric, so on the inside, so it's flat against the window, so it's close to the pattern. And then I've got my trusty friction pen, which erases with heat. So I'm going to pop my pattern on the window and pop my hoop and my fabric on top of that. And then stepping away from the window, you can see that that's worked fine. And I did just go over a couple of bits, to be honest. So once you step away from the window, because it's not that easy to see that you're doing a perfect job because the sun's glaring in your eyes. Once you've taken it away, you can then just neaten up any bits that you need to, you know, if you missed any sections, if you just need to go over parts of it, you can just do that now. And then once you've finished tracing your pattern, you just remove the fabric and just flip it round so that the pattern's on the other side, so it's the right way. Another method is to use water-soluble stabilizer, which you put through the printer just like paper, and it'll print your pattern onto it. You need to change your settings slightly, but it does tell you how to do that in the instructions. So you just need to use a slightly different setting on your printer. And once you print your pattern onto this water-soluble paper, it will look like this. So I've just cut this out, so you can cut, it's just like paper, you can just cut around whatever the pattern is, and then you peel this pattern off and you stick it onto your fabric, which I'll show you now. So you just peel the pattern off and it just leaves you with this sort of sticky, you can tell that it's, it's quite weak, so it will wash away with water. I'm just going to use the edge of this fabric just to demonstrate, and then you just stick it on your fabric. So this method is great to use on items that are difficult to trace onto. If you don't have, say you want to embroider onto a piece of clothing, then these are great for that, because you might not have a very flat surface that you can trace onto, that you can put a hoop onto or something like that. But also they're great for fabrics that are difficult to trace through because of the colour of them. So obviously this is quite easy to trace through because it's a light fabric, so I can see through it. But if you had a jumper, for example, that was thick, or you wanted to embroider a navy t-shirt or something and it was hard to trace through that fabric because you can't see, these are great to stick onto the fabric and then stitch over them. So then what you would do is you would just stitch through this using it as a pattern, and once you're done stitching and you're happy with your work, you'll just wash this away. And I just do that. I don't put it through the wash. I just use sort of just warm water, cold water, so that it doesn't impact the fabric that it's on, to wash it away. And I'll show you what that looks like as well. Okay, so I've got a bowl of lukewarm water. If it's on clothing and you know what the temperature is for the item of clothing, then you'd probably be okay to use hotter water, but with fabric like this where you don't know, don't use too hot water. So I'm just going to demonstrate how this pattern, this method of getting your pattern onto the fabric works. So the water soluble stabilizer just comes away with water. It's easier to do this in the sink because you can use the tap, and the tap will just sort of push all of these bits of stabilizer away easier. And there you go, the pattern's completely gone now, and I would obviously have my embroidery on there, and then I just put this on an airer to dry, and it should come out nice and dry, and you have no pattern underneath your embroidery anymore. For this method, make sure you're using colour fast DMC thread. DMC is colour fast, so if you do run this thread underwater, it will not run, and then it won't damage, and it won't impact the fabric you're using. I can't say the same for other brands of embroidery floss, but I know there are other ones, I just haven't tried them. So I use DMC because I know it's colour fast and the colour's not going to run onto my work once I get it wet, especially if you're embroidering clothing. That's going to be key, isn't it? Because you're going to want to put it in the washing machine, and therefore you need to make sure your thread isn't going to ruin the item of clothing, especially after you've spent all that time creating something really lovely and adding your own stamp to it.